We're also joined this evening by board members Mitch Ehrlich, Mary Rafanti, Jose Salcido, Maren Sederquist, Brian Yee, Pierre Luigi Oliverio, and Lisa Morse. Deanna Merzadagan, our president, sends her regrets, but is unable to make tonight's meeting. I would like to personally welcome all the candidates and let you know that we appreciate your willingness to serve. The prior Willow Glen Neighborhood Association Mayoral Forum, last held in 2014, with all the major mayoral candidates. And another mayoral forum will be on September 21st, 2022, with the two final candidates. The Willow Glen Neighborhood Association was established 49 years ago, and we'll be celebrating our golden anniversary in 2023. So stay tuned for a special event. Now I would like to turn it over to our WGNA board members, Mitch Ehrlich and Pierre Luigi Olivero, who will be our tonight's moderators. Thank you.
There we go. Good evening, mayoral candidates. Thank you for coming tonight, and thank you for everyone who has dropped in today. I hope this will be an informative evening. So the order of who answers each of the questions tonight will be rotated between the candidates, and unless told differently, responses will be limited to about 30 seconds. We do have a timer. The moderator will say the words "thank you" when your time has expired, and out of respect for each other, please try to stick with those time limits. Each candidate may rebut a particular answer from another candidate. They may rebut with the acknowledgement of the moderator by raising their hand, or in this case, hitting that little hand icon. But the rebuttal will only be allowed after all candidates have had an opportunity to answer the question. Both the rebuttal and the response to the rebuttal will be limited to 30 seconds. A rebuttal must be addressed to a specific candidate, and we'll limit rebuttals to the first two candidates that express a desire to rebut per question. Each candidate will be limited to 6 rebuttals this evening, and we will be keeping score. Our candidates this evening, most of you who are here know them, but in alphabetical order are Supervisor Cindy Chavez, Councilwoman Deb Davis, Councilman Matt Mahan, and Councilman Raul Perales. An esteemed board here. Since we may not be able to get to every question this evening, would each of the candidates like to would be open to answering additional questions in writing that we could then share with the 40,000 residents of Willow Glen? If each of you are okay with that, just raise your hand now and we'll send you those questions when we can. So thank you. So with that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Pierre Luigi.
Thank you, Mitch, and thank you again to each of the mayoral candidates on taking the big step to run and represent San Jose. We will now commence with the opening statements of 4 minutes, starting in alphabetical order. If you would please be so kind as to incorporate the following question into your opening statement of 4 minutes, and that is follows. Political campaigns are unfortunately painful for the candidate and their families due to misinformation. In honor of families and the sacrifice they make for candidates, please share a family member who provided you sage advice and kept you smiling when times were tough. Supervisor Chavez, the floor is yours for 4 minutes.
Thank you so much, Pierre Luigi. And I really just want to thank all of you who are taking time away from your families to spend time with us tonight. I think that just shows how important this is to all of you. Since I'm asking for your vote, I thought I would tell you just a little bit about me and my values. I grew up not too far from here, and in growing up, my father was a carpenter. He's passed away, and my mother a teacher's aide. And we were the house in the neighborhood that everybody could come and hang out. All the kids came over after school, and if neighbors wanted to come visit, they did. People knew that if they needed support, they could come to my parents for help. One example of that is that stands out for me when I was growing up is that a neighbor got cancer and was able to get experimental treatment, but they needed a place to leave their 3 girls, and they stayed with us. And over our family's history, we had at least 7 families stay with us while they saved up to buy their own place. My parents were tremendous role models, and their values have shaped me. And those values have led me to look at the community differently. I see my role as not just being part of a community, but really doing my best to make that community better. I've done that through being a leader in the labor movement, running a nonprofit, serving on the San Jose City Council, and now on the Board of Supervisors. I'm running for mayor because I believe and know that genuine leadership can save lives, build affordable housing, make our communities safer, and stand tall for justice when it's needed. And like so many of you, I believe in San Jose, and I believe that we can be compassionate to the homeless and still have beautiful parks. I believe that we can support our essential workers and show them dignity, respect, and still have a growing economy. And I am so delighted to be with all of you tonight, and I hope you will consider me as a candidate. Thank you.
And Cindy, did you not want to use the balance of your time?
Well, the only thing you asked about sage advice.
Oh. Okay, go ahead.
I'll say this, that I have a mother who is just the most kind, gracious, generous person. And her advice is always, Cindy, do good.
Excellent. Well, in that case, we'll skip to Councilwoman Davis, but all of you have 4 minutes. So I just want to make sure you knew that. So thank you. Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you, Pierluigi, and thank you, Wigna, for hosting this first mayoral candidate forum. I'm delighted to be here. I am Deb Davis. I'm the councilwoman for District 6, and that incorporates almost all of Willow Glen. And I've been the council member since 2017, so I'm in my 2nd term now. It sounds like Cindy's family and my family were very similar in taking in people. My parents were foster parents growing up. I grew up in North Dakota. I'm not native to San Jose. And I would say, other than having foster kids in our home, I delivered newspapers from age 8 to 18, and I attended Catholic school, and those were probably the defining features of my childhood. And then I went on to get an economics degree and moved to California in 2002 with my husband. And my husband is the person who always is there to support me and provide sage advice and do all the design for all of my candidate materials as well. And we moved to San Jose in 2004 and are raising our children here. I was in my career before, I was in education research, and what I was doing was really looking at school quality with the goal of improving academic outcomes for underserved kids. That was all before I was elected to council, and my path to council was starting as a volunteer in our community and then joining the board of my neighborhood association, and eventually going on to apply for and be appointed to a city commission. And that's really where I got involved in our local government and interested in that. And I was so interested in it, I knew I wanted to run, but I also wanted to be prepared. So I went back to grad school to get my master's in public policy and in leadership, and ran for city council and was elected in 2016. Some of you may already know what I ran on because I see many familiar names and faces. And I ran on restoring the 5 core services of our city: police, fire, roads, parks, and libraries. And of those, I think everyone would agree that public safety is paramount. And I'm really proud of what we've done as a council. In the time that I've been in office, we've added over 300 officers to our police department. And many of you know, we have not only broken ground on Fire Station 37, but it's almost done and it will be open this spring. Very excited about that. But my proudest achievement as a council member is getting a life-saving Lucas device on every fire engine and available for every medical call. And what those do are they're automated chest compression devices. So they really do save lives. We've also, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our repaving all of our local streets by 2029. That is well underway, as many Willow Glenners know, because a lot of it got repaved in the last year. But of course, there's more to do. Our big issues got even bigger during the pandemic, and I'm sure we'll be talking about homelessness and blight tonight. I'm running because I want to create a safe, clean, and thriving San Jose, and I know we can do it. We can restore San Jose's status as America's safest big city. We can prioritize keeping our gateways clean, and we can tackle homelessness, providing more safe places for people to stay with sanitation and services to reintegrate them back into society. We also need to respect our neighborhoods. And so I will prioritize restoring our single-family home zoning. When the state initiative passes that I'm working on, many of you know, we're taking back local control of land use from Sacramento. So again, thank you, and I look forward to the discussion tonight. I think Pierluigi's muted.
There we go, unmuted. Sorry, Councilmember Matt Mahan.
Thank you, Pierluigi. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Willow Glen Neighborhood Association for hosting tonight's forum. I'm looking forward to the conversation. My name is Matt Mahan, and I'm the current council member representing District 10, the Almaden Valley and Santa Teresa Foothills, where my wife Sylvia and I are raising our two little kids, Nina and Luke, who are 4 and 2, and constantly give me sage advice such as stop working, get off your phone, will you play trains with me? So they're always bringing me back down to earth. Of course, I rely on Sylvia constantly for her guidance and support, and to make sure we're always living up to our values. I'm running for mayor because I believe our city's heading in the wrong direction on many fronts, and that our local governments, and I include both our city and county in this, are failing to get the job done. I'm sure I don't need to tell you too much about what isn't working. You see the homelessness, trash and graffiti, mental illness and drug addiction that's going untreated, crime that's going unaddressed and often unpunished, unaffordable housing, and ultimately local government that's failing to deliver on its core responsibilities despite spending more than ever. I'm running to take on the culture of complacency that has taken root at City Hall. We deserve better as a community, but we're only going to get better if we work together and demand results. My family on my mother's side has been in San Jose for 4 generations, Italian and Irish immigrants who worked in the orchards and the canneries. I grew up over the hill down in Watsonville in a working class family and got to know San Jose as a work-study scholarship student. I commuted 4 hours a day round trip on public buses over Highway 17 to come to San Jose like everyone's family for greater opportunity. Worked on the grounds crew in the summers, and then got a great education during the school year and fell in love with our city, with its people, its diversity, weather, of course, and its great neighborhoods. So much so that when I graduated from Harvard, I came back through a program called Teach for America as a public school teacher in our Alum Rock School District out in the East Side, and saw the challenges many of our working class families face, much like the family and neighborhood that I grew up in. After teaching, I went on to the private sector where I built 2 successful technology companies, the second of which was acquired by Pinterest. Many of my former employees became millionaires because of that acquisition, but I didn't go on to Pinterest because I wanted to get more involved locally. I wanted to run for local office, for city council, to see if I could have an impact on some of the big challenges we face. What I bring to the job as a former CEO is that I've learned the hard way through experience over a decade in the private sector that you have to set clear goals, measure your performance, be honest when things aren't working, be willing to try new approaches, and ultimately be accountable for results. That's all that really matters. I got to City Hall just over a year ago, and I saw what you already know, which is that your city government does not operate that way, not nearly enough. And I certainly don't need another year on the council to tell you what's broken or how we can work together to begin to fix it. We've called our campaign a revolution of common sense because it's all about focusing City Hall on the basics, like fighting crime and cleaning up our streets, It's about being more innovative, like investing in drug treatment centers and mental health facilities and modular housing units, not building brand new apartments at a cost of $850,000 a door. That's no way to end homelessness in our community. And most of all, it's about accountability, such as my proposal to withhold raises from elected officials and top bureaucrats if we don't hit key city goals, such as reducing the crime rate and improving our road conditions that we should set at the beginning of each year. I hope you'll join our revolution of common sense, because we have to come together and demand more.
Thank you. Thank you. Councilmember Raul Perales.
Yeah, well, thank you and good evening. It's an honor just to be here with you tonight. I'll say growing up, I never thought I would end up in a position of elected office, and I certainly never thought I'd be running for mayor. I'm currently the Downtown District 3 council member, and I am finishing up my 8th and final year on the council here. I'm a lifelong resident of San Jose. I come from a multiracial and working class immigrant family. My father immigrated from Mexico at the age of 12, and he and his family were picking and packing the fruits right here in the orchards of San Jose. And my mother's side immigrated about 100 years before my father's from Ireland. My family grew up humbly here in a rent-controlled apartment in West San Jose. And I'm proud to say that I was the first in my entire family to be able to graduate from college, graduating from right here at San Jose State University with a degree in mathematics. My first career was as a substitute high school teacher, and I started actually teaching my old high school and ended up teaching with Santa Clara County Alternative Education, working with our at-risk youth in community day schools and at juvenile hall. I myself was raised by teenage parents that dropped out of high school in order to take care of my sister and me. And I saw many of my own friends struggle just to complete high school as well. And that motivated me to go into teaching, and specifically to teach in alternative education, because I wanted to be able to help at-risk students to have a better chance at graduating and achieving success themselves. After about a year of teaching, I went back to school to become an EMT, or an emergency medical technician. And that led me to my next career as a San Jose police officer. I actually continued to teach for 10 years, and I was the first and only active duty officer to ever teach at Osborne School in juvenile hall. I served with the San Jose Police Department for 8 years, and I continue to serve today as a San Jose Police Reserve officer, because I am truly passionate about serving and protecting our community. I ran for city council in 2014, and against the odds, I was able to win a tough race, and I've now proudly served on our council for 7 years. My entire life's work has been dedicated to public service, and now I want to help lead our city as your next mayor. I have experienced the influence and the change that a mayor can bring to a city, and in the wake of this pandemic, we now have an opportunity to be able to emerge better, to do things differently, to make a difference in the quality of life for all San Jose residents. I've been one of the council's strongest champions for affordable housing and addressing homelessness. And I will work to create comprehensive solutions that address our homeless crisis and help build housing that is affordable to all families who call San Jose their home. I want to make us the safest big city in America again, while also reimagining how we police our communities, and especially our communities of color that have endured systemic racism for decades. I want to help our struggling small businesses get back on their feet and create quality jobs in a city that is economically thriving and resilient. I know that working together, we can build San Jose for all of us. And I thank you and look forward to engaging with you tonight. And with the remainder of my time, I will say that for sage advice, it certainly has come most recently from my wife. We share a 3-year-old son together, and we have a daughter on the way who's doing 6 weeks. And she's always there to be my sounding board.
Thank you, Councilmember Perales, and all the candidates for your opening statement. Mitch?
Okay, first question of the night is to Councilwoman Davis. Question number 1, City Charter Section 201 lists a special power of the city to utilize eminent domain to take private property, oftentimes against the wishes of the private property owner. What is your position on the city's use of eminent domain under Charter 201?
I don't support eminent domain usually. The only time I have supported it on council was in very, there were, I think, 2 limited instances where the actual owner could not be found because the title went back to the early 1900s. And that was, and they're for very small slivers of property that exist downtown. And those are the only times that I've supported eminent domain.
Thank you.
I'm up.
Luigi?
Yeah, Mitch, you'll progress through the candidates. Like
Oh.
go through all 4.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, same question to, who's up next? This would be Councilman Mahan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, look, I think eminent domain is a very severe action, and one that I would generally oppose unless in the case where we can't figure out who the owner is. I also have participated in a vote in that circumstance where we could not identify who the actual owner is, or if there is a very serious overriding public safety concern, in which case the owner has to be fairly compensated, but it should be almost never used.
Okay. Councilman Perales, your answer.
Yeah, thank you. I think, similarly, eminent domain should be an absolute last resort. It's certainly not something that I think any one of us would want to see with our own homes or businesses or to happen to our family. And it should absolutely be a last resort for local government. And since I have been involved in office, that has been how we have taken up this issue of eminent domain. And I think that's exactly how it should continue.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Supervisor Chavez, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I think that eminent domain is something that we have to be very cautious about its use. And we have to, frankly, we should do everything in our power not to have to use it, including engaging the property owners as best we can. And when we're unable to do that, and really when there's a risk of public safety, is when it should be used.
Okay, next question is for Councilor Mahan. City Charter section. Oh, did we skip someone? I'm sorry.
I
Oh,
just-
Deb, sorry.
Yeah. I just wanted to note that it seems that
Sorry, Deb, is this a rebuttal?
this is a rebuttal. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to note, I think Supervisor Chavez, you were in the past participated in the eminent domain attempt for the Tropicana Shopping Center, and I'm guessing that it sounds like your views on eminent domain have changed, and I'd be interested in hearing about that.
So
Go ahead, Supervisor Chavez.
thank you. I'm just, yes, I mean, I would say that one of the things you'll notice about Story and King now is how vibrant it is with all the private investments that's there. I did support eminent domain in that area. And frankly, if it's a vote I would take back if I could.
Okay. Thank you, Supervisor Chavez and Councilmember Davis for the interaction. Okay, now the question rotates to Councilmember Mahan. City Charter Section 300 determines San Jose has a city manager form of government, like larger cities such as Dallas, Phoenix, and San Antonio. Should San Jose continue to have a city manager form of government or change it to where the mayor hires and fires department heads? Someone unmute, Matt.
I'm so sorry. I'm in the habit of muting myself after speaking, and thank you for the question. I believe that our mayor, the only elected official in the city who is elected citywide on an agenda for the future of our city, ought to have the power to hold department heads accountable. I think it is very, very difficult to implement the agenda that the people supported at the ballot box when the mayor has no or very little executive authority at City Hall.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Mahan. Councilmember Perales.
I personally, in my own opinion, would support a strong mayor form of government and have done a lot of homework on this topic. But more importantly, I support the process that the city has to actually amend our city charter. And we actually just completed that process through a charter revision commission that worked and actually took up this issue and has decided to recommend to the council that we do not change our form of government to a strong mayor form. And ultimately, it will be up to the council to decide what we put on the ballot. And I will be supporting the charter revision recommendations. I will not be recommending that we move to a strong mayor form of government.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I think that a strong mayor form of government in some instances can work, but I don't necessarily think the system we have right now is broken. I think what we need to do is be much more disciplined about holding the city manager accountable for all the departments. And that is done collectively with all the members of the city council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilwoman Deb Davis.
Thank you. I think that a strong mayor form of government has its pros and cons, just like our council manager form of government has its pros and cons. And I agree with Councilmember Perales that we have a process for determining what goes on the ballot to change our charter. And the Charter Review Commission was not interested in giving the mayor more power. One thing that I think is not well known about our charter is that voters can actually recall the city manager. And that's something that we haven't ever used and something to think about.
Thank you. Mitch?
Okay, next question, and this is to Councilman Perales to start. And this concerns City Charter Section 401, which determines that San Jose has 10 council members. Our Charter Commission, however, has suggested that there be 14 council members, but as part of that, they failed to identify how to fund what presumably would be additional seven-figure costs. What are your thoughts on both the expansion in numbers and potential funding?
Yeah, personally, I think 14 is too large. I also don't think we're going to be making any growth in the council members' seats anytime soon. We would want to tie that up, in my mind, with the next census. So 10 years from now, we've just gone through redistricting, as you all are really aware of. And so I think that we have plenty of time to discuss that, but I would not be supportive of growing that large to 14 council members.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I think that the council's the right size right now. I think if that were to be considered, it should be taken up closer to the next census and something that should be reconsidered, 5 years out so we can plan.
Okay, Councilwoman Davis, to you.
Thank you. I'm concerned about adding 4 council members. It would add multiple millions of dollars to the city budget every year. And if the concern is that we don't have enough services to our residents in the council offices right now, we could bump up each council district's budget a little bit to hire a couple more staff members. And that would save us a lot of money by not having additional council offices and by not needing to renovate 2 floors of City Hall, which we would have to do to accommodate new council members.
Thank you.
Okay, and finally, Councilman Mahan.
Thanks. Yeah, not only is it a fiscal mistake to expand the administrative overhead at City Hall, but it's unclear what problem it really solves. I've seen no evidence thus far that we would get better governance, more accountability, that we'd be more likely to get the results that we want out in the community by adding a few council members. And it's already hard enough to have substantive discussion and debate on the council with 11 of us. So I do not see any reason to expand. I'm always open to new data and arguments, but I'm certainly not convinced at this point.
Okay, next question is starts with Supervisor Chavez. City Charter Section 403 is about redistricting. Recently, the City Council voted on whether or not to further divide Willow Glen against strong opposition from Willow Glen residents. 90% of Willow Glen is in District 6, and in the past, it was 100% in D6. How did you vote on City of San Jose redistricting regarding Willow Glen this year? And for Supervisor Chavez, how would you have voted?
Well, yeah, that would be a hard question for me to answer. I didn't spend all the hours that my colleagues did looking at that. But what I would say is this: I think that San Jose grew so much and in such weird places that we didn't have as many good choices as that we would have liked. And the other thing I'll say is, just for those of you who live in Willow Glen, you know that everybody, when they're selling their house, lives in Willow Glen.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. Councilwoman Davis.
I worked hard with Councilwoman Pam Foley in District 9 to ensure that the borders between District 6 and 9 stayed as close as possible to similar, even though District 9 had to gain residents in order to be equalized for the population. So I voted to stay the line.
Thank you, Councilwoman Davis. Councilmember Matt Mahan.
Yeah, thank you. We actually did not see that much population growth citywide. There was a bit of growth up in D4, which necessitated moving some lines. But unfortunately, we saw a redistricting process that was very politically motivated and driven by electoral goals rather than equal proportional representation. And I actually offered the motion to move the lines back to restore the D6, D9 lines. Councilor Davis seconded, and we collaborated on trying to keep the D6, D9 lines where they should be. It's same with D10 and D2 where we were not successful. But I appreciate our partnership on that because our line should not be driven by looking at preferred electoral outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Raul Perales.
Yeah, I actually would agree that we did not have the best redistricting process. And in fact, the entire council agreed that we need to look at how to improve that moving forward. The movement of the D6, D9 border was one of the more contentious discussions. I did support a small geographic change between the South Willow Glen border, including the Canoas Gardens neighborhood, that would have allowed greater diversity in the demographic of voters in District 6 and District 9. And other than that, the council was nearly unanimous through our support on the rest of the changes in the council districts.
Thank you, Councilmember Perales. Mitch?
Okay, next question.
I have a rebuttal to that.
Another, okay.
Okay, rebuttal recognized.
I just wanted to note for the record that the way that the border did change actually increased the diversity in District 9 and kept the District 6 numbers very close to what they were in terms of the ethnic breakdown. And I think that's important because that's the guidance that we got.
And it's important to note, candidates, when you make a rebuttal, it needs to be to a candidate. So is there someone you wanted to direct that to?
Well, it was in response to Councilmember Perales's comment. So
then Councilmember Perales, your response?
Yes, I knew that, but I don't know, maybe everybody else didn't. So I do believe it did increase the diversity, and that was fact in the District 6 area. It may not have been the case for District 9, and that was part of the complication of this entire process. It was not perfect, but ultimately, it's where we've landed.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. This is about elections and voting rights. And then we're going to start with Councilwoman Davis. And this concerns City Charter Section 404 has a U.S. citizenship requirement for both council members and mayor. With that said, both New York City and San Francisco recently decided to allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. What's your view on allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections such as city council, mayor, and other city ballot measures?
Thank you. I was actually the only council member to vote against allowing non-citizens to vote last week when we first took up this topic. I think it's really important for citizenship to have its rights and responsibilities and for those to be clearly defined in voting. I would also like to say it's very important in terms of ensuring that voters know what they can vote for and preventing voter fraud. If we have differing requirements for who can vote and in which parts of which elections. So it's important for it to remain citizen for everybody.
Davis.
Okay, Councilman Mahan, your answer.
Thank you. I do not support allowing non-citizens to vote in local elections. And I frankly think it's a little misleading to say that Councilor Davis was the only council member to vote against it. What we voted for was a study session, which I personally believe is the best way to have this debate in the open with public comment, not a surprise memo from a couple of colleagues. And I was very disappointed in the process, but I think a future study session where we can hear counter arguments is the right process. especially given that there may already be 6 votes on the council to put this on the ballot. But I think that voting is a right and responsibility of citizenship.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Perales.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, personally, I do support expanding our local voting rights to non-citizens. I also support process and recognize that this was a last-minute add to a very long charter revision process. And so our community has not had an opportunity, and neither did our commissioners have an opportunity to vet out this. And I think that needs to happen. That's ultimately as well why I supported the study session. And I agree that we should have that conversation. And ultimately, this will be a decision up to the voters in the city of San Jose, because we would merely be recommending it to be placed on the ballot.
Okay. Finally, Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I don't support the memo that was put forward by 2 women who I have a great respect for, but I don't support voting rights at the city level. I think what this really hit me as is how frustrating it is to not have had proper immigration reform. And that really, I also just want to say, I think that the idea of making sure that you have that study session is very important.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor Chavez. Next.
Sorry, I was going to mention real quick. No, sorry, it's Kathleen. I wanted to mention to the candidates that it's going to sound awkward, but I'm going to say thank you when we're at 30 seconds because we're trying to keep it to a certain amount of time. So if I say thank you, that's me cutting it off at 30 seconds. So I apologize. It probably sounded weird when I was saying thank you in the middle of something.
Thank you, Kathleen.
You're welcome.
Our next question starts with Councilmember Mahan. City Charter Section 401 lays out the election schedule for mayor. Most large cities such as Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Seattle have their mayoral election in off years. Do you support off-year elections for mayor? And if so, why?
Thank you. My preference is for off-year mayoral elections because I think it's really healthy to have a focus on local and state issues outside of the presidential cycle. Presidential cycle takes all the air out of the room and is quite a distraction. That being said, it will be on your ballot and the public will get to decide. And I do understand why some folks want to align it when there's higher turnout. It's not an unreasonable debate to have.
Thank you, Councilmember Mahan. Councilmember Raul Perales.
Yeah, I do support it, and I support it for the one reason that it's when we actually have most voters turn out, and I think we're best off having a citywide, our only citywide member of the council to be elected by more people in the city of San Jose. And ultimately, just as the last question, this will be something that we up to the voters in the city of San Jose.
Thank you, Councilmember Perales. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I do support the elections being held in presidential years. It is a citywide choice, and we should have the most people we can going to the ballots.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. And finally, Councilwoman Deb Davis.
Thank you. I prefer to keep the mayoral election in the off years. I think it's important for us to be able to focus on our local issues and to have that discussion citywide. I also think it's important to note that we now get mailed, every single person who's registered gets mailed their ballot every time. So I'm hopeful that even in the off years, we're going to see greater turnout because of the work that the county has done to allow everyone to vote in a very convenient way.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis.
Okay, off to Mitch.
Okay, next question. This is about open meetings, and we're going to go to Councilman Perales. City Charter Section 412 and 413 cover meetings of the city and citizen participation. The question is, should conducting city council meetings online remotely, as we're doing tonight, become a permanent option for council members, staff, and residents to participate?
Yes, I do believe that we should continue to allow a hybrid environment for council meetings. I think we have seen this opportunity allow a lot more people throughout our city to be able to participate. You think about working families, somebody able to stay home, but be able to join remotely, virtually, as well as having the opportunity to stay engaged in person. So I do think that we should continue a hybrid environment.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Yes, I think that the board members and our staffs should be present. I think that the community should have options. One thing that we saw at the county, I'm sure you've seen it at the city too, is a higher number of people who are disabled being able to engage, both who, who may have challenges getting to the meetings, but also in terms of, hearing and being able to translate easily in other languages. So I really like it.
And Councilwoman Davis.
I agree that we should keep the hybrid option for the public. I do think it's important for council members and staff to the greatest extent possible to be in person. I think there was a loss of camaraderie, frankly, among the council members during the time when we were forced to all be online and in our own homes, and in my case, garages, garage. And I think that we lose collegiality and frankly, we lose some politeness, some manners.
Thank you, Councilwoman Davis.
And finally, Councilman Mahan.
Yeah, and I'm going to sound really repetitive here. I did write the memo last year to direct staff to make the investment to allow for hybrid meetings on the public side. And currently that's true for electeds, but I agree with my colleagues that encouraging council members, elected officials to be in person has a lot of value. But for the public, we ought to have private options for seniors, young people, families, just to help more people participate.
Thank you, Councilmember Mahan. For this next question, let's do 60 seconds. Starting with Councilmember or Supervisor Chavez. City's Charter Section 807 established the police department. Do you believe there should be more sworn officers? If so, how many? And how to fund the ongoing cost?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for the 1 minute, since it's a complex question. First of all, yes, I mean, we obviously need to get our police department much healthier and much more robust. I think that one of the things we should be looking at, there was a really old study, so I think we actually need to update the study, but there was an old study that looked at a 5-year plan, and that 5-year plan would have us, I think we would be at a little over 2,000 right now, and we're under 1,000. So I think in terms of funding, the most important thing that we should be looking at is opportunities for bringing officers on and using the excess fund balance and considering whether or not the excess fund balance could be considered ongoing revenue. Because the way the city budgets now, it's considered one-time revenue, and I'm not sure that makes sense.
Thank you. Councilwoman Dev Davis.
Thank you. Yes, I do think we need more officers. We're at something like 1,150 sworn officers, which is about 300 less than our max number of officers that we had about, I'm sure Raul knows the exact year, but sometime in the early 2000s. What we learned last Friday is that it costs about $200,000 for one officer. And so for about $1 million, we get about 5 officers. And it's really, for us, I think we need about probably 200 to 300 more officers. And we also need probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 to 75 community service officers. Now, those are not individuals who carry a gun, but they're already doing 50% of the reports for our lower priority, not life and limb type calls. And you may have actually.
Thank you, Deb.
Thanks.
Councilmember Mahan.
Sadly, we're no longer the safest big city in America, and we need to get back to that status. Our staffing target, my #1 budget priority, will be getting us back to pre-Great Recession staffing levels. And from there, the way to sustainably grow those staffing levels is to have a strong economic development strategy. If we grow the tax base, we can properly fund our police department, fire, and other core city services. I also think we need to get more value for our dollars by reducing street homelessness, because that's taking up way too much of our 911 response time. And we need to support our officers and show them that we're going to help them focus on hardened criminals and the crime we need to end.
Thank you, Councilmember Mahan. Councilmember Perales.
Yeah, as a police officer myself, obviously I know firsthand the challenges that we face. And I started with the police department in 2006, and it was 2009, the last year that we had just about 1,400 police officers, and we're still the safest big city in the country. We need at least 250 more officers to get back to those staffing levels. We are at about 1,150 today, and that was over a decade ago. And so we have a larger population now, but at a bare minimum, that's where we should be to adequately protect our community. I have been one of the strongest advocates on the council, helping to rebuild our police department as I took office, and I'm happy that we went from about 850 when I joined the council to that 1,150 we're at today. But we are still woefully understaffed to truly be able to protect our community the way that we should, and to be able to get us back to the safest big city in the country.
Thank you, Councilmember Perales. And off to you, Mitch, and returning back to 30 seconds.
Thank you. So this deals with the airport curfew. We're going to go to Councilwoman Davis. I believe our airport curfew is 11:30. Do you support that, or do you oppose the airport curfew at its current time? And if so, what would you advocate for?
Well, I got to say that the 11:30 is past my bedtime, but I do understand why we need an airport curfew to be at a reasonable hour. It definitely needs to be before midnight. We have a lot of residents nearby, so it is important to keep that curfew.
Okay, Councilman Mahan, to you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the curfew is important for maintaining quality of life. Noise is one of the biggest nuisances. We hear about it in the council office, and the last thing we want to do is have people disturbed in the middle of the night because of big engines roaring overhead. So I support the curfew as well.
Okay, Councilman Perales.
Yeah, I used to live for about 10 years in the closest neighborhood to the airport, Rosemary Gardens. And I'll tell you, it is still one of the biggest concerns for that community there. We absolutely need to keep our curfew intact. It doesn't stop us from flights that need to operate in and out of the airport. It's been operating just fine, and we were one of the fastest growing airports just before the pandemic.
Okay, and finally, Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I actually worked really hard to put that curfew in place. And what I would say is that, the neighborhoods around there really deserve the curfew. And I just want to concur with Raul that the fact that it hasn't impacted the business of the airport, I think it's a winner for everybody.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. Our next question starts with Councilmember Mahan. City Charter Section 807 establishes a planning department. The city's current general plan allows the population to grow 40% by the year 2040 to 1.4 million residents. Should the city allow for higher population growth? And if so, what is the maximum population of San Jose you'd support by 2040?
Great question. I think it's less about the exact number because we can't stop people from creating jobs or having babies. It's more about the restrictions we're going to put on development and where we're going to put it. I've been an advocate for smart growth and protecting our single family neighborhoods. I do not believe that a developer should be able to buy a single family home and without public input, bulldoze it and replace it with a fourplex. I think the economic growth strategy and really our housing strategy for San Jose has to be putting housing near transit and particularly downtown so that we don't have.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And then moving on, same question for Councilmember Perales.
And, we actually go through a process called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, and where it lays out what we expect some of the growth to be in the city of San Jose. We try to mirror that with the growth that we will have and we will allow through development. I do think that we are spot on with that estimate. And I don't think we should be estimating much more higher than that simply just to get more growth. I think that the number that we're at, 40,000, is the number we should be at.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I apologize. I missed part of the question because a neighbor's dog was barking.
Happy to repeat.
Thank you.
City's current general plan allows the population to grow 40% by the year 2040 to 1.4 million residents. Should the city allow for higher population growth? And if so, what is the maximum population of San Jose you'd support by 2040?
Oh, thank you. I think that the most important thing we can ask ourselves is the things we have control over, which is how do we grow in a thoughtful, healthy, respectful way. And I think that means in my mind is that we continue the progress that we've made in building more densely and with higher density near transit. And thank you.
Thank you. And Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you. I agree that we should focus on the things we can control. And I also think that we should focus on taking back the local control that we have ceded to Sacramento over the course of many years. That's why I am supporting the initiative to restore that local control of land use decisions and ensure that we can actually follow our general plan, which I support.
Thank you. Mitch.
Okay, next question. We're going to start with the Councilman Perales. To accommodate our population growth and more development, but at the same time address the demand for water, should the city phase out lawns, front lawns, backyard lawns, and single-family houses? And if you propose or agree with that, if so, when should that occur by?
Yeah, at the moment, no, I would not support phasing out as a requirement lawns. I do think we can continue down the path that we have been on right now, which is a path that is continuing to try and incentivize people to convert their lawns to drought-resistant lawns. Going through that process myself, my front lawn is now completely dead, and we're working out how we might be able to tap into some of the valley water resources and create that a drought-resistant front lawn.
Okay, Supervisor Chavez, to you.
Thank you. I think that's exactly right, Raul. We need to really focus on education and working with the city, the counties, and Valley Water to really educate people about the options they have for their yards and how important it is that we're, doing our best to not use water, not as much water.
Okay, Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you. I do think this is much more in the purview of Valley Water than it is for the city. We have so many issues at the city, and water use is actually not very much in our purview. And so I think it's really important. I myself have a native and drought tolerant front yard and really nothing in the backyard because the dogs have torn everything up. So we have no irrigation, but I think it's important for us as a city to actually focus on the city services that we can control and not get involved in these kind of issues.
Okay, and finally, Councilman Mahan.
Yeah, thank you. I don't support a government mandate, particularly when it comes to what you want to do with your front or backyard. I think incentives work great. We should be willing to expand subsidies for those who voluntarily want to move to drought-resistant landscaping. I've done that in part of my yard, but that should always be a choice. And the real answer here is investment in infrastructure and technology, particularly expanding recycled water in our Purple Pipe network.
Thank you, Council Member. Next question, Supervisor Chavez. SB 9 allows one house to be demolished and replaced by 4 units. And if the property is within a half-mile radius of a bus line, SB 9 does not require a garage or driveway be built. Do you support or oppose SB 9?
I oppose SB 9.
Okay, Councilmember Davis.
I opposed SB 9, and I am leading the volunteer effort to gather signatures for the statewide petition to allow local governments to have control over land use decisions again.
Okay, Councilmember Mahan.
I also oppose SB 9 and was the first council member to do a public press conference opposing a very similar policy called Opportunity Housing, and have been spreading the word about that same initiative at every opportunity.
Okay, Councilmember Perales.
I do support SB 9. I did support it, and I will not support the recall. I do feel a balance of local control and state regulation is necessary. And we don't live in a city with border walls. And so what happens, say, in Cupertino affects us in San Jose and vice versa. And as cities, we have historically worked within silos and when it comes to development and land use. And if we go back to complete local control, I think we shouldn't be surprised to see the same lack of progress that we've seen over the years in addressing this housing crisis.
Thank you. And continuing with the SB 9 theme, starting with Councilmember Davis, SB 9.
Matt's hand is up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Mahan for a rebuttal.
Yeah, I just wanted to rebut Councilmember Peralez's last point in that I think local control is really important because the state cannot take into account the conditions of local cities. We've got a fiscal issue in San Jose because we were built out as a sprawling suburban city. We've got terrible traffic. Most of our air pollution comes from cars on the road. And so we ought to have freedom and flexibility over how we hit our goals. I'm not saying that there should be no goals, but we need the flexibility to hit them in a way that works for our city, and every city is different.
Thank you. Councilmember Peralez?
Yeah, again, I mentioned I think a balance is important, and I don't think that SB 9 specifically is really taking that balance to drastic measures. And I do think that maintaining a solid balance of local control and state regulation is again necessary.
Thank you. Again, starting with Councilmember Davis for this next question. SB 9 eliminates public processes such as advance notification, community meetings, public hearings, and appeal processes. Should the government eliminate public processes in other areas?
No, in fact, I've actually added public processes to our homelessness solutions in our district by putting in place community advisory committees when we have a homeless solution or a program come into one of our neighborhoods. So I actually think we need more public process and community input rather than less.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
No, the community should have a very active and full role in shaping how we change, so much so that our office in District 10 goes the extra mile and goes out and actually flyers neighborhoods and knocks on doors and engages people when there's development and we have change. And we make sure people know about community meetings. If we're going to streamline anything, it should be the permitting process within our planning and building department, not the community input.
And Councilmember Peralez.
Yeah, I think community input is extremely important, but we also, again, need to balance that level of input with the outcomes that we're actually trying to achieve. And if we are going to work more efficiently, we have to find areas where the process itself is being utilized to kill the outcome that's desired.
Thank you. And Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I think that, community input is really critical. And when I was on the council, we started a program called the Strong Neighborhoods Initiative for exactly that reason, so that neighbors in advance could plan what their communities were going to look like, prioritize budgeting. And I think all of that really made people feel more connected to their city and much more buy-in.
Thank you. Mitch?
Okay, next question. This is to Councilman Mahan. This concerns the Emergency Reserve Fund. City Charter 1213, which establishes the reserve fund, does not dictate the amount, but instead leaves it to the City Council. What do you believe is the prudent amount for the emergency reserve, and should there be a minimum floor set?
Yes, absolutely. And I am big on paying down debts and having robust reserves, because as politicians, we tend to have a bad habit of wanting to spend new dollars and take credit for those one-time expenditures. So I think that the right way to set that is to do a projection of past shortfalls, take into account one-time black swan events like COVID, and have a pretty healthy reserve in there. I think it's the only responsible thing to do.
Okay, Councilman Peralez, what amount and the minimum floor?
Yeah, well, first off, absolutely, we need robust reserves. And I think we ran into this issue during the Great Recession. And quite frankly, I was a victim of that as a city employee, getting a pink slip from the city and realizing that we did not have sufficient resources to be able to cover shortfalls when they happen. I think we want to be able to look at the operations of the city and ensure that we have reserves that can carry us through at least a one-year period.
Okay, and Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I'm going to echo my colleagues here and say, absolutely, we need reserves. And as a matter of fact, I think that the city now has maybe 3 different reserves that are very focused on different needs. And part of the reason that was done was really to protect the institution long-term from the ebbs and flows of the economy.
Okay, and finally, Councilwoman Davis.
I think I agree with all my colleagues. It's really important to have a reserve, and I think all of us feel that way because we lived through and governed through the shock of the pandemic, and we would have been in a big world of hurt if we hadn't had the federal government to bail us out in part of that. That being said, I think a year's worth of reserve is probably more than we can possibly achieve. But the targets that are in place right now to have about 10 to 15% of our annual revenue in reserve, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. Councilmember Perales, former mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, who was also in the state assembly for 30 years, canceled a homeless summit in 1997 as he concluded there was no possible way for any single city or county to solve the homeless problem. On January 3rd, 2022, in the New York Times, he stated, "I am still of that opinion." What do you say to that?
Yeah, I agree. It's absolutely not something that any one city or any one mayor is going to be able to resolve themselves. Addressing homelessness is a crisis. It'll be a top priority for me. And I think the success of our next mayor is going to be measured on how well we address this crisis. Our homeless population has grown year over year. I want to be able to turn that trend around in addition to the permanent solutions that we've been creating to be able to fight and identify and create better solutions to actually temporarily house our homeless as well.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I don't think there's anything more important. And I have to say, while I understand his sentiment, it's not the way we get things done here in Silicon Valley, here in San Jose. And I really am confident that working together, we can deal with this, this issue. And we do need to work with all of our cities and all of our partners to get us there.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
I completely disagree. I think for one city, or with the sentiment that we don't need to do anything about homelessness because one city can't solve it. It's true, one city can't solve it, but we are better together. The city and the county and the state need to work together on these solutions. And I think having a summit and having a group of people together to work on this makes perfect sense. And that is actually what we're doing with our city and our county, but we need to do more, and we need to do it more quickly.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
Well, certainly we need more support from state and federal sources, but that's no excuse for us continuing to implement strategies that aren't scalable and aren't working. As I said in my intro, we can't solve this problem at $850,000 a door. We need to be radically more pragmatic, and San Jose needs to innovate and lead the way on practical solutions, prefabricated modular units that cost a fraction of the cost, getting honest with ourselves about what it's going to take to address mental illness and addiction, which has led to so many being on our streets, and then creating pathways, opportunities to work towards something better.
Thank you.
Okay, next question, and this is continuing on the issue of homelessness, and we're going to start with Supervisor Chavez. Homeless activists are currently circulating a petition, I should say, to utilize a portion of the county fairgrounds to provide centralized services to homeless individuals in our community. What are your thoughts on that proposal?
The County of Santa Clara is working and has been working with the City of San Jose to make land available both for interim housing, for RV park housing, and for permanent housing. And what we're using the fairgrounds for now, and what I hope to be using it for in the future, is a park, and we're currently using it to fight COVID-19.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up this question. I think it's really important. There's nothing better that we could use that land for than housing our homeless individuals. There is a lot of parking lot space available, and we need more places for safe parking for RVs and for people living in their vehicles. And we could put very cost-effective interim housing in that space. I very much support that petition.
Okay, Councilman Mahan, to you.
Yeah, and Thank you. I've met with many of the advocates pushing for those solutions and have been vocal myself. We are underutilizing the land at the fairgrounds. We have been for decades. If we can move forward a cricket field, we can certainly and should have in the past moved faster to build transitional housing at scale. I also want to make the point that San Jose cannot bear this burden alone. The county is the largest landholder in the county, and we need to distribute these transitional sites countywide and make sure every city's doing their fair share.
Okay, and Councilman Perales, to you.
I think we all absolutely need to do our part, and that includes all public agencies and being able to identify specifically public property that agencies have to be able to utilize. I think that the fairgrounds could be a part of that solution. I think that part of the message, though, needs to be clear that the fairgrounds is not going to be the end-all be-all solution simply because it's a very large site. We're not going to want to solve this crisis on any one large parcel of land. But could it be a part of that solution? Absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, next question starts with Councilmember Davis. Caltrans property, which is controlled by the state and not the city, is often filled with trash. The city of San Jose does not control these properties and struggles to get Caltrans to keep these areas clean. The city of Oakland sued Caltrans, which resulted in an agreement to keep these properties clean for a number of years. Should San Jose do the same?
Yes, for anyone who takes the Meridian exit, for anyone who gets onto 87 via Lalong or on Ozare, yes, 1,000 times yes, we should sue so that we can keep these areas clean.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan?
I think the state of our city is embarrassing, and we need a no excuses approach. As mayor, my first task in the first 90 days will be to clean up our city, which includes cleaning up land under other jurisdictions and sending them the bill. Happy to sue them. And in fact, we've taken direct action in my district already. I've even hired a private contractor to clean up messes when city and other jurisdictions have been too slow to do it. So we just need a no excuses approach to cleaning up our city.
Thank you. Councilmember Perales?
Yeah, our gateways coming in and off of our freeways into the city are despicable. And absolutely, we need to be able to take all measures to be able to get that cleaned up. We actually, a few years back, were on the verge of suing Caltrans, and we threatened to do so. We had a better response from them then. I don't think that we should hold back from using that tactic again.
Supervisor Chavez?
Yes, I'm going to be in violent agreement with my colleagues here. And just to add one other thing, you know, when Caltrans in the past has not been collaborative, getting a chance to sit down with them most often does move them in the right direction. And so I also just want to say that in addition to legal action, we should take all actions, including sitting with them and coming up with a plan for the area and then having them live up to whatever goals and standards we set with them.
Thank you. Mitch?
Thank you. Okay, so now this is to Councilman Mahan. City Charter 807, which establishes the city personnel department, this concerns personnel, to meet our sustainability goals and reduce vehicle emissions. Should city employees who are typically working behind a desk be allowed to work from home permanently every day? And if not every day, how many days a week? Or would you advocate that as soon as it's practical to bring everybody back to the office?
You know, as a former CEO, I see the value in face-to-face collaboration and mentorship for younger employees, but I believe that's a decision that needs to be made by individual managers. I think remote work can work for certain types of work. My whole philosophy is to be outcomes focused. You need to set clear goals, measure performance, hold people accountable for results, and different jobs can be done in different ways. And that's really the decision of accountable management.
Councilman Perales.
Yeah, I think it's specific to the nature of the job at hand. I've heard a lot of frustration and complaint from individuals coming in to want to utilize city services to find out that they can't have that in-person interaction because it's still only remote and online. And then alternatively, we hear there's a lot of efficiency from being able to have some hybrid environment. I think it'll be specific to each department, and it should be something that we allow moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Chavez, to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that being able to cut the commute is really critical. And we've been working not only with the county as an employer, but with other employers to look at whether or not they could reduce a certain number of people commuting because it's better for the climate. And then the other is we're looking at hybrid workplaces, and there's a lot of job satisfaction. And let me just remind everybody that we're desperately trying to hire, retain, and keep workers now.
And finally, Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you. There is one area where I want people to start coming in every day, and that is the permit center. We have seen that a hybrid work environment or a online only work environment does not work to serve the residents well. Everybody else, I think it's okay. Accountability is more important than location, and managers should be able to make those decisions along with the directors of the departments. But for the permit center, we need people in-house.
Okay.
Okay, next question is for Councilmember Peralez. The city of Arcata, California removed a statue of President William McKinley from a city park since he was viewed as an imperialist who espoused manifest destiny, which offends indigenous people. Should San Jose remove the statue of President McKinley in St. James Park, as it did with Christopher Columbus and Thomas Fallon?
Yeah, I won't specifically take a position on that today. I would say that based on what we hear feedback from our community, if there's a strong opinion on a piece of public art that the community maybe at one point supported, but today does not want to uplift in that type of manner with a strong piece of public art, then I would be supportive of a similar process to what we've already gone through in removing the Fallon statue to play out ultimately the outcome of that statue.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez?
Yeah, I think before we take any action like that, that you need a really robust community process and lots of community engagement. And, you know, I don't have an opinion about that today, but I will say that one thing I learned being on the San Jose City Council is that art is always controversial.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis?
Art is always controversial. I have sat through, as well as Councilmember Peralez, the removal of 2 statues already. And I honestly, I don't have an opinion about removing McKinley from St. James Park, but I gotta say, I think we have better ways to spend our time on council than to continue worrying about these statues. It takes a lot of time away from staff and a lot of our time away, and I don't know how valuable it is in the community.
Councilmember, thank you. Councilmember Mahan?
Yeah, we have much bigger fish to fry. I mean, this is having tons of community meetings to discuss every statue in the city is why, that's just why we're not focusing and delivering results on the things that affect every resident. Public safety, paving our roads, addressing street homelessness. We got to get back to basics, focus the public's attention on what we're going to do to hold ourselves accountable to move the needle on those issues. I'm all for adding context around statues, making sure people feel heard, but I really worry about the slippery slope here.
Thank you. My follow-up question was going to be, should future statues only be of animals and not people? But I think we'll just go on to Mitch.
Okay, this is to Supervisor Chavez. This is a long one, so y'all listen closely. In April 2021, the County of Santa Clara chose to bypass the city's conditional use permit, the CUP process, when it established a facility for formerly homeless individuals across from the San Jose Swim and Racket Club. I believe it's on San Pedro Street. The CUP process allows for public meetings and hearings where enforceable guidelines can be established by the commission. In doing so, the county executive stated that the county has intergovernmental immunity such that they can bypass city planning requirements. Do you believe the county should be able to locate this type of housing anywhere and in so doing circumvent the normal public process?
Such a good question. You know, my general answer to that would be no. And the reason that I supported that project ultimately was that Supervisor Ellenberg, who I have a great deal of respect for, was really working with the community to make that, to really make that facility one that the neighborhood would ultimately embrace.
Okay, Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you. I think the county should go through the process. I think More importantly, the county and the city need to work together on these and to ensure that the public engagement happens much, much earlier in the process and that we don't get into these kind of controversies and threats of legal action.
Okay, Councilman Mahan.
Yeah, I agree. I don't support the county's actions there. I think ignoring community input is entirely the wrong way to go. I don't think you can vote for that and then be against it. I issued a memo last year that called on the city manager and the county executive to proactively and strategically identify sites countywide so the public would have a heads up about a real roadmap for addressing homelessness, not these one-off reactive cases.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councilman Perales.
I would have hoped that the county would have gone through the CUP process. I am certainly not interested in anything that we might delay something beyond a reasonable timeline, but I believe our CUP process is fair, and it is one that could have brought in more community support on this.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, next question starts with Councilmember Davis. Currently, the city of San Jose is polling residents on increasing property taxes. It'll be based on square footage of the property. Is there a need to raise taxes? And if so, which type of tax do you support raising?
It's a great question. We definitely need more economic development in our city to provide the revenue that the revenue for services that residents deserve. That being said, it is up to the residents if, while we're waiting for this economic development, which as mayor, I would really prioritize bringing into our city, it is up to the residents if they want to add tax themselves for additional services.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
I agree. I'm personally not in favor of increasing taxes, particularly now as city and county revenues are the highest they've ever been, and we're failing to deliver results. If the public indicates through the poll that they want the option to vote on it, I'll support putting it on the ballot. But I think the real answer here is to attract more employers to downtown and North San Jose, build out the tax base, and be able to properly fund core services.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Perales.
Yeah, I too would support if our community emphasized that they would like to see this put on a ballot, and ultimately, again, it would go to the voters as a decision. I think that we absolutely need to increase revenues, and taxes is one of those ways that we need to look at. I would specifically like to look more at how we can increase revenues from business tax through the development of new business as well.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I too would be very interested in what the public says. I will just say that I think if we recognize the delta that we have in terms of police officers in particular, that one of the things that we have to think about is if we're going to prioritize public safety, how are we going to pay for it?
Thank you. Mitch.
Okay, this is going to Councilman Mahan. We talked about lawns. Now we're going to talk about trees. San Jose has a tree canopy of 13.5%, which is considerably lower than Seattle, Boston, or Pittsburgh, which respectively have 27, 28, and 40% of tree canopy. 90% of San Jose's trees are on private property, which of course can affect the sidewalks. Should City Hall repair homeowner sidewalks in order to promote more street trees? And if you would propose that, how would you suggest funding it?
Thanks for the question. I love trees and just planted one out in my sidewalk strip last year, but I think we put an undue burden on residents in making them fully responsible for the maintenance of street trees and fixing sidewalks. And, you know, it disincentivizes the planting and maintenance of trees, which is a public good. And so we, over time, I think the way to start is with philanthropic and private partners who want to see us have healthier air and shade. And then in the long run, if the public does support a ballot initiative to bring that back under the city purview, of course, that's something I would be happy to put on the ballot. But in the short run, it's got to be through partnerships.
Okay, Councilman Perales, to you.
I think this is where we start talking about priorities. If we want a good way to know that we won't be able to add more police officers, we can do something like change this policy, knowing that we don't have the revenues today to be able to fund pavement, where a tree may be causing damage. And I think that's where ultimately the city went with this policy. I will say that a few years ago, I did increase our hardship exemption because I saw that there were a lot of families that could not pay or could not afford to fix their pavement. And so we did increase the ability for community members to get approved for a hardship exemption where then the city could come in and fund it.
Thank you.
Okay, Supervisor Chavez, to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that we need to take multiple approaches. And I think one of them is that for not a lot of money, we can invest in nonprofit partners to really help us bring forward more trees. And then the other I think we have to think about is where can we plant trees, because we need them for the entire community and for carbon cleanup, and that includes parks.
And finally, Councilwoman Davis.
We absolutely need more tree canopy, but I agree with Councilmember Perales. This is where we have to start talking about priorities, and fixing sidewalks is, I think, less important to most individuals in our community than adding additional police officers. And so I agree that we can do public-private partnerships and we can work with nonprofits to address our tree canopy, but I don't think we can take that back on. Pierluigi remembers when we put that back on homeowners because of the severe budget shortfalls that we had in the city.
Thank you.
Okay, next question starts with Councilmember Perales. Mayor London Breed of San Francisco is promoting surveillance cameras in high crime areas. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of efficiency and effectiveness of having surveillance cameras throughout the city. We actually are piloting that throughout the city as well. We have a program where private cameras, you can opt in to tap into the police department to allow the police department to have access to that. It's one of the easiest ways we can access video without having to actually fund it ourselves. And I've seen the benefit of having video, especially for our public safety needs.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Yes, I would support it.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Yes, I definitely support that. We're already seeing that in a neighborhood that was District 2, and I think it's going to be your District 10 soon, Councilmember Mahan, where they put cameras on multiple residences' homes, and they saw a decrease in crime.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
Also in support. In fact, in the last cycle of the ARP funding, I worked with our mayor to include a $250,000 pilot for additional license plate readers. Having built consumer apps, I also am very sensitive to the privacy concerns. I think that we have to continue to have and communicate very strong data retention policies, and that data should only be held on to if it's actually being used in an active court case. Otherwise, it needs to be deleted on a regular schedule.
Thank you. Mitch?
Okay, this is to Supervisor Chavez. Of the 20 largest U.S. cities, San Jose currently ranks number 17 in information technology spending per capita. Despite that, San Jose proclaims itself as the capital of Silicon Valley, but does not allocate the necessary budget to utilize modern technology. What are your thoughts?
Technology can be very, very expensive. And this is one area where I think governments should work more closely together. And in fact, I think the county, the city, and even VTA should be looking at where we can do not just shared purchasing, but even shared use of some staff. All of us have enormous backlogs of technology needs. It's very hard to hire technology folks. And so we should be working much more collaboratively.
Councilwoman Davis.
I think one of the greatest untapped resources in the city of San Jose is our own tech companies. We don't partner with them in the way that we should with government and, say, Adobe, for example, and their solutions. I think we could get better pricing if we simply just asked our neighbors.
Okay, Councilman Mahan.
I'm a broken record on economic development being the way to fully fund city services in the long run. But in the short run, we have to be as effective and efficient with our resources as possible. Since I started chairing the Smart Cities Committee, our 311 app has gone from 2/3 of customers being dissatisfied to 2/3 being satisfied because we've done process improvements and optimized how we're doing service delivery for the various services within the 311 app. So we can keep getting more value for the dollars we have if we're smart about setting goals and iterating.
Okay. And finally, Councilman Perales, to you.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much about investing more in this technology as much as it is as partnering better with the tech companies that we know that actually make the capital of the Silicon Valley. I think we need to do that much more better. I would agree that we can collaborate more with other public entities because it is numerous public entities that are in this same predicament and that could all benefit from the technology that is right here in our own backyard.
Thank you. Next question of Councilmember Davis. Code enforcement today is based on resident complaints. Should code enforcement instead be proactive in regards to blighted and/or unsafe property?
So code enforcement is a mix actually right now of resident complaints, and then they put certain properties, some of you I'm sure know the gas station on Lincoln and Kirtner, on a list that they go to every 90 days, I think it is, to review whether it has started to look better or whether they're taking care of the things that they've already been cited for. I think what we need to do is to have that easier to get somebody on the list for a more regular review and for the review to be more frequent.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
It has to be both, because residents deserve to know that when they see a problem and report it to the city through the 311 app or another avenue, that it's going to be addressed, and we have to close the loop with them and tell them what we did, why we did it, and how we're solving the problem. At the same rate, it can be more efficient and more equitable to be proactively doing code enforcement, particularly in areas where we know we have recurring problems. So we need both approaches. The key is, are we actually getting accountability when we cite somebody? Are we following through and actually resolving the issue or not? And that's where I think we can do better.
Great. Councilmember Perales.
I think this is one of the many services that is inequitable and has been because it has been more of a complaint-based service. And I think if we can open up more opportunities for proactive code enforcement, whether it is making it easier to get somebody on a more proactive list, or just shifting the percentage of time of code enforcement from responding to calls for service to being proactive, we can make this a more equitable service throughout our city.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. This is actually one area I would invest in expanding staff. I think code enforcement is so important. And I really agree with the point that Councilmember Perales just raised. And in addition to that, I think we should be working more closely with the district attorneys, community prosecutors, so that we can be much more assertive when we're dealing with really challenging properties.
Thank you. Mitch?
Okay, this is to Councilman Mahan. We're back on the issue of homelessness. City of San Jose currently requires a permit to distribute food at parks. Do you support that policy?
Yes, we should. And in fact, I think we should really encourage food distribution to come indoors to preset locations. I was at Martha's Kitchen just yesterday. And I don't think that we should be incentivizing congregating in parks across the city. I think we've got to do a much better job of getting people off of the streets and into transitional shelter and addiction and mental health treatment.
Okay, Councilman Perales, the permits.
Yes, I do. And in fact, I represent the district that has some of the worst examples in St. James Park, where people utilize that on a daily basis for a de facto soup kitchen. That's not what parks are meant for. We have worked to try and relocate individuals into facilities that even the city has funded. That's what we should be doing, trying to get these individuals that want to help those that are hungry in our community, those that are homeless, but we should not be allowing that without a permit at a city park.
Okay. Supervisor Chavez.
Thank you. I think the permits are really important. And one other thing I would recommend is that, and something that I did again when I was a council member, is worked with the providers, especially at St. James Park, to look for kitchens that were nearby, that we could incorporate these folks who wanted to do goodwill with nonprofits that were already prepared to do so.
Thank you. And finally, Councilwoman Davis.
Well, this is another area where we all agree. I think the permits are important, and it is really important to get people into places like Martha's Kitchen or Grace Baptist downtown, where they can not only get a meal, but also get connected to services, because it is so important to get people off the streets by connecting them with services so they can reintegrate into society.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is for Councilmember Perales.
I actually had a rebuttal.
Rebuttal. Councilmember Mahan.
Yeah, we're agreeing too much. And look, we may all agree on this issue of permits, but I have to say, when it comes to St. James Park, I walk through there frequently, and we may agree on the need for permits, but we're not properly enforcing, or otherwise we're being way too lax. But the conditions there have for years dragged on, being totally unacceptable. And we need real measurable results when we talk about using permits to manage how our public space is utilized. So I have to throw that out there, because I think the current state is unacceptable.
And Councilmember Mahan, are you directing at someone?
Well, I know St. James Park and the progress there was cited by both the Supervisor Chavez and Councilmember Perales, and I just I don't see the success, frankly.
Okay, well, we'll split the difference and give them 15 seconds each to have a response of the 30-second time.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Supervisor Chavez.
I wasn't saying that we've had success. I was saying that there are options and tools we can use to provide people services away from the parks. That was the point I was raising.
Thank you, Supervisor. And Councilmember Perales.
Yes, similarly, I did not tout progress. I said the opposite, actually, that I have one of the worst examples, or best, if you will, on why these permits are needed. I will say, for over a decade, our police department has not enforced the permits. And it's been an ongoing battle back and forth. I think that having the need for the permit is still important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next question for Councilmember Perales. What are your thoughts on increasing the use of drones to augment the police department?
I'm in favor of utilizing drones. We only have one right now, unfortunately, and it's quite a process to get an officer to be permitted or licensed to pilot it. And it's a very, very narrow scope that we have right now on where and when we can use it. Our police department is very interested in the expansion of that, and so am I.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
Yes, I also support the use of drones, but would just reinforce something that was said earlier, which is the retention policies for data and material that come off of all of those have to be just really nails. And we have a good retention policy at the county. We have one at VTA, and I think they are very important.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Yes, I also support the use of drones. I think they're quieter than the helicopter, but it is important for the privacy policy to be in place and the data usage and retention policy to be followed to the letter.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
Yes, as I said before, technology is the best way to give law enforcement leverage, and we just need to ensure that we build trust with the public around how we're using the data, why it's valuable, and what we're doing to protect people's privacy and ensure that that data collection is not abused.
Thank you. I believe that's Mitch.
Okay, next question. We are back to Supervisor Chavez. City of San Jose just put out public notice regarding potentially issuing upwards of $250 million in pension obligation bonds. Do you believe that this is an issue that the voters should be given an opportunity to approve, or is it something that should be left to the city council?
I'm not sure I entirely understood the question, but are you asking if the city should put forth pension obligation bond?
No, the question is, should this be an issue that the voters decide on, or should it be left to the city council to decide?
I think that I would have to give a little more thought to that. I'm not sure I understand the context of that. In general, as it relates to putting out any kind of real significant bonds, I think the council would do that unless it was a bond that needed a vote of the people. So I'm sorry that I can't be more responsive.
Okay. Councilwoman Davis.
I don't think we need the expense of a ballot measure to know that pension obligation bonds are a bad idea. They are ultimately trying to time the market and trying to basically buy on margin our way out of an unfunded liability for the pensions. I don't think we need a vote of the people. I think we need to not actually put forward any pension obligation bonds.
Okay, Councilman Mahan.
This is a terrible idea, and if we can't stop it at the council, we should put it on the ballot so you all can keep us honest. I mean, the council historically has proven to be a poor steward of public funds. It's why 25% of our general fund goes to retirement costs, 15% of that to an unfunded liability. The last thing we should do is borrow from Wall Street to gamble on Wall Street to try to catch up from our past fiscal mismanagement. So I'll continue to fight this at council, and if the only way to stop it is at the ballot box, let's go there.
Okay, and finally, Councilman Perales.
Yeah, I think the opposite. I think that pension obligation bonds may be our only avenue of actually relieving this tremendous debt that we have in unfunded liability. And I think that that's the long conversation that the council has had. But I would be open to the concept of ultimately putting this to the voters. I do think it is a worthwhile endeavor.
We have a rebuttal.
Matt Mahan, Councilmember Mahan.
Yeah, thanks. I just have to strongly disagree with Councilor Perales on this issue. I mean, pension obligation bonds help bankrupt Stockton. The idea that we can arbitrage the market, that somehow we're smarter than the folks setting the discount rate on bonds, and that we're going to magically do something that we have almost never done, which is outperform the market with our investments, is just, it's wishful thinking. It's a shortcut. It sounds like a good idea. Most likely it will extend the period of time that we have a large unfunded pension liability, and we should not do it.
Thank you. Councilmember Perales.
Yeah, that is one poor example. And in fact, over 95% of cities that have engaged in pension obligation bonds have been successful in relieving their unfunded liability and those debts. And quite frankly, we almost went into debt ourselves back in the Great Recession without a pension obligation bond, simply because of our pension obligations. Again, why I think that we're left with very, very little options if we want to change the trajectory of the city's fiscal issues with pensions.
Thank you, Councilmember Perales. Thank you to everyone so far. Fantastic performance tonight by everyone. Thank you for allowing us to cover so many issues. The next question is for Councilmember Davis. Long one. Mayor Janet Gray Hayes in 1976 declared the biggest problem facing San Jose is the jobs housing imbalance. This imbalance leaves San Jose with less revenue to pay for basic services, while people living in neighboring cities enjoy superior municipal services, since the jobs housing imbalance is opposite. This topic has been discussed for decades with little improvement. Even the proposed Google development does not improve the jobs to housing ratio, since it adds thousands of housing units. What are your thoughts on preserving land for jobs? Councilmember Davis.
Thank you. That was a long question, a long intro to a short question. Our jobs housing imbalance is our most important issue for our city's budget. And I think that we do need to preserve our commercial and employment lands. That being said, there is a way to do some mixed use on some commercial lands that have historically had retail, and to be able to put housing on top of retail.
Thank you. Councilmember Mahan.
Great question. She was absolutely right. We have far too little of our land reserved for employment uses, around 15%, which is way too low. We absolutely need to emphasize attracting employers and high-paying jobs to our city to build out the tax base. I do want to note, however, that housing at a density above 45 units to the acre, which is very sustainable, in fact, we can go much denser downtown and near some of our major transit stations, is net fiscal positive for the city. So dense housing where it's appropriate and jobs are what's going to get us out of this crisis, but we should not be converting employment lands. Thank you.
Councilmember Perales.
Yeah, I think we have two crises at conflict here. Inevitably, yes, the jobs housing imbalance has been a major Achilles heel for the city, but we also have an affordable housing and a housing crisis, housing shortage crisis. And so to try and solve both of those is very difficult. But Matt is correct. a way to be able to achieve both the growth of jobs that we need and the housing that we need is to be building more densely. We know that if we build densely enough, then the impact on the city services and fiscal constraints are minimized, and that's absolutely the way that we need to go.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez.
I think both building densely is absolutely right. I also think that protecting the employment lands that we have is really critical. And I think the point that Raul raised about the constant tension between building more housing and where people can find opportunities to build housing in these employment lands is very tempting, but we need to be really disciplined about protecting what's left because there's so little of it.
Thank you. Mitch?
Okay, this goes to Councilman Mahan. We have had a continued rash of traffic fatalities in the city. What are your thoughts on red light cameras?
Well, again, technology, as I've mentioned, I think is the best leverage for law enforcement and keeping people safe. I know there are state prohibitions that we have to work on. And again, data retention, data privacy is a critical piece of that. But I think proper signage, good built environment practices, and using technology are all ways we can reduce this. But we're gonna have to work with our state delegation to solve the red light issue.
Okay, Councilman Perales.
Yeah, the city of San Jose has been advocating for this opportunity for years. I personally have traveled to Sacramento and lobbied state legislators. We initially had our police department that was not in favor, that they aligned themselves with statewide police agencies. But this last go around, our local police department did support us in trying to initiate red light cameras, but the pushback was still at the state level. We absolutely need to get our state legislators and state public safety agencies on board.
Thank you. Supervisor Chavez?
Thank you. I support them. And I think they're really just one of many tools we need. I think all of us have observed not just dangerous driving, but it seems to me that during the pandemic, people started to drive even more aggressively. I don't know if any of you have noticed that. And so I think we're going to need not only to look at red light cameras, but many, many other tools.
Okay, Councilwoman Davis.
I agree with we've been lobbying for many years about red light cameras at the state level, and our police department supports them, but we also need more traffic enforcement officers. That's why adding strategically to our police department, starting with traffic enforcement officers and downtown foot patrol and foot patrols in general to add to our public safety are part of my plan to make us the safest big city in America again.
Okay.
Okay, where am I starting here? Councilmember Perales. The San Jose Mercury News in an editorial admonished the legislature for not banning the sale of nitrous oxide at tobacco and vape shops. Nitrous oxide has become an addictive party drug. Do you believe the city should ban it as it's taken action on other items at stores, liquor stores, tobacco places?
Yeah, yes, I do. I think that at times when we see instances like this or materials that are being utilized really for something not as their intended use, and then ultimately affecting our community, but specifically these with our children, I do think that takes some more restrictive action.
Councilmember or Supervisor Chavez.
Yes, I agree. And I think that, we've seen just how dangerous not just the addiction is, but the chemical impacts, especially to young people. We've seen that with vaping and other kinds of recreational, I guess I was going to say drugs. They are recreational drugs. So yes, I would be supportive of that.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
Yes, I have 2 teens, and that was why I supported the ban on flavored vape products and nicotine products. And I can't imagine a safe recreational use for nitrous oxide.
Councilmember Mahan.
Thank you. I agree with the ban. I have 2 kids who will be teenagers one day, God willing. And, I think we have broader addiction issues as well that we need to get serious about addressing. Methamphetamine, fentanyl. We need inpatient drug treatment facilities and stronger laws to compel people to get care when they need it. And I think the revolving door we've got locally is totally unacceptable.
Thank you. Mitch.
Okay, this is back to Councilwoman Davis, and we're back to homelessness.
Actually, Mitch, you want to start with Supervisor Chavez.
My apologies. So this is to you, Supervisor Chavez. We're back at homelessness. So San Jose has taken, by our account, over 70% of Santa Clara County's homeless housing and services, even though we have 53% of the population. How do you propose working with the county to get a more equitable distribution of housing and services to other cities that may not be doing their part and inadvertently laying the burden at the feet of our residents in San Jose?
So I'm not sure that I concur with the assessment about the number of homelessness by population. So, but let me just say this, that part of the program that we developed through Measure A, the housing bond, was to make that the county uses that money and we play the role of the bank. And we're really working to get that out to other cities and not just San Jose, but San Jose has been so responsive that they've actually reached out and utilized that resource.
Okay, Councilwoman Davis.
I think it's really important for the other cities to do their fair share. And if they're not willing to do their fair share, then they need to help us by paying their fair share for anything over the amount of population that we have, that we're disproportionately providing for homeless services and housing.
Okay, Councilman Mahan, to you.
Yeah, I don't think that the County Board of Supervisors has done enough to ensure that San Jose is treated fairly here. I think we have an over concentration of services and street homeless, and I think we've allowed other cities to push problems to San Jose and not tried to fairly distribute the burden. I wrote a memo last year that unfortunately my colleagues here, Councilmembers Peralez and Davis, did not vote for, that would have instructed the city manager to ask the county executive for specific parcels and facilities in other cities that could be used to combat this problem. I think we need to get much tougher on this.
Okay, finally, Councilman Peralez.
I think it's important to remember that even as a city or mayor, we're not going to have the authority to be able to force other cities to do something. But should they? Absolutely. We need to see more done more equitably in other cities. I will point out that the population is not, I think, the best tool to use, because the city of San Jose does have a disproportionate number of homeless throughout the county. So should we see matching numbers of support and solutions? Absolutely. But do we need more out of our neighboring cities? That is true as well. And we need to be able to work better with our county to ensure that that can happen.
Thank you. Next question starts with
we have two, Pierre.
Hey, it's rebuttal time. Okay, go, Mitch. Sorry.
Why don't we go with Supervisor Chavez, since you led off with this question?
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point actually that Raul did, that when we did our last homeless count, 70% of all of the homeless lived in San Jose. And I think, and I just want to be clear that what the county's resources do is we give money to local governments to be able to build homeless shelters or interim housing. And so we are giving San Jose money, we're giving Campbell money, we're giving other cities money. So we're not forcing anybody to take money from us to be able to build these resources.
And Councilman Peralez, your response?
I don't know if that was a rebuttal to me.
That was to me.
I'm sorry.
My apologies.
That was Matt. I was just acknowledging that.
Councilman Mahan, your response. I
appreciate the comment. I'm pretty sure that the last census that I read showed that 82% of our homeless residents last lived within our county, but it says very little about what other cities are doing, the extent to which they are telling homeless folks to move along, the services are in San Jose. And I don't think that our forward-looking strategic plan has done enough to hold other cities in our county accountable for doing their part. It's not enough to just say, well, the cities that apply for the money are the ones who have to bear the burden. We need to proactively have a strategy for distributing this burden.
Okay, and back to Councilwoman Davis.
Thank you. I just wanted to address the issue that Councilmember Mahan brought up about his memo, asking the county to provide locations for dealing with homeless solutions. And the reason that I didn't support it, and I can let Councilmember Peralez speak for himself, is that work was already underway and it was redundant. And I didn't think we needed to spend time at the council to direct staff to do something that they were already doing.
Well, my response is that it's not underway. I think it's been underway for years, and I still have not seen a clear report from the county on where we can site transitional housing, treatment facilities, evenly distributed across the county that asks our North County neighbors to do their part. And I haven't seen those sites still, that report isn't produced. We've done it in the city of San Jose. We've taken on a lot of the burden. The county has not done this countywide. I still haven't seen it.
With all due respect, your memo only mentioned the city of San Jose.
That is incorrect, and I will happily circulate it to everyone.
Okay. Well, we promised we would get you out here at 8:55, and believe it or not, we still have questions, and we've covered such a variety, and we really appreciate your patience, your energy, your zeal, everything that you're doing to run for mayor. But with that said, how about we just finish it up with a 30-second closing positive statement about you and your campaign, and we'll start in reverse order. So we'll start with Councilmember Raul Perales.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you. And thank you to all the participants that came in tonight. If you'd like to learn more, please reach out. My website is raulperales.com. My email is raul@raulperales.com. You can get involved. And I just want to say as well that I have respected the process and the opportunity presented to us tonight. And my colleagues in the answers in the debate that we've gotten into, and look forward to this campaign.
Thank you, Councilmember Perales. Councilmember Mahan.
Thank you. I appreciate you all putting on this forum, the great questions, the many great questions. I want to thank my colleagues for their responses. I enjoyed the conversation, and just want to encourage folks to check out mayhanforsanjose.com. We're running a very grassroots campaign and would love to get you involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Davis.
I want to thank the Willow Glen Neighborhood Association and all of you who tuned in tonight, as well as my colleagues, for the great discussion. It was nice to finally get all of us together. I very much want to create a safe, clean, and thriving San Jose, and I would really appreciate your support. Please go to devdavis.com, or you can email me at dev@devdavis.com, especially if you want to get involved with the initiative and signature gathering, or want to sign the petition.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. And Supervisor Chavez.
She's muted.
Okay. Brian.
Ryan.
Well, let me just say to
There you
my
go.
colleagues first, thank you. This was the first time I think that all four of us have been together. So it was very interesting, and I really appreciate it. And to the members of the Willow Glen Neighborhood Association, thank you so much. And thank you for the very, very thoughtful questions. I know this is the beginning of a campaign, and I look forward to speaking with any of you about any of the issues that were raised and information that you'd like to get. If you'd like to get more information from me, you can go to cindychavezformayor.com. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you again to all the candidates, and may your passion spread to our community about your zeal for San Jose, and make us all be further involved in improving our city. We really, really appreciate your participation and wish you all the best of wishes. Good luck on your campaigns.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you.
Night.
Night.